placeholder.
Yep.
Did you check to see if anybody signed in?
No one has yet.
Full house.
And perhaps in a minute. Yeah. We're about there.
Energy vehicles.
Okay.
Yep. Oh, he's not.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Linda Johnson, could you please give the invocation?
Yeah.
Let us pray. Jesus, Jesus, I thank you that you make the darkness tremble and you silence fear over this city. I thank you, Lord, that you love this city and the people here. Your plans for us are for good and not for evil, to prosper us and give us a future and a hope. We know that we are not able in and of ourselves to bring about the fullness of all that you desire. It is not by power and not by might, but by your Spirit that we will thrive. We call forth the counsel of heaven to counsel with those that are gathered here tonight, to bring about your plans and your strategies for the future. Lord, we cannot change our history, but we can learn from it. We cannot erase the past, but we can begin tonight to bring about a better tomorrow. So, Father, we thank you for your presence here tonight and your direction as we move forward to make that better tomorrow. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you. So now, since it's 6 o'clock, we'll officially call this committee meeting of the whole to order. Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Mayor Miller,
Here.
Alderpersons Borneman,
Present.
McClanathan,
Here.
Ross,
Here.
Parker,
Here.
Busker,
Here.
Brashaw,
Here.
Mysick,
Here.
and Berberay.
Here.
And if you could please stand and join us with the Pledge of Allegiance. Alderman Mysick.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Alderman Mysick, this meeting is yours.
Thank you. So we'll start with item number 4, the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded. We have a motion by Alderman Brashaw and a second by Alderman Ross. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Let's move on to number 5, approval of the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held on July 13th. Council, do we have any discussion?
Chair,
Yes.
motion to approve.
Second. Thank you. We have Alderman McClanathan and a second by Alderman Busker. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Motion carries. And now we have public comments. We have no comments today. So let's move to item 7, recognition of appointments, fire department personnel. Chief Liggett.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I could please invite the appointees to the front with me, please. You guys can remove your masks and join me.
Chief, that might be better for the video if you turn them around.
Yeah. Yes. Face the camera for me.
Face the computer, yeah.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Good job. This certificate of appointment to all who shall see these presents greetings. Know ye by the authority vested in me and reposing special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, and fidelity and abilities of Scott E. Stickle, Tom M. Forty, and Chris Lowry. I do hereby appoint you to the position of Deputy Chief. Scott, Tom, the District Chief, and to Chris as a lieutenant in the Freeport Fire Department. To rank as such, the 10th day of August 2020. To the appointee. Your appointment within the Freeport Fire Department makes you heir to a long and proud tradition of fire department service. By accepting this appointment, you are charged with demonstrating those standards of performance, moral courage, and dedication to the fire department and the city of Freeport, which may serve as an enviable example to your fellow fire servicemen and women. Your desire to excel and to guide others must be boundless. Your appearance must be a model for others, and your performance must be a continual reflection of your sincerity, attention to duty, and moral responsibility. By exhibiting unfailing trust and obedience towards your superiors, cooperation and loyalty to your subordinates, understanding and strength to those you serve, you will contribute greatly to the effectiveness and good name of the City of Freeport Fire Department. Given under my hand, Freeport Fire Department, Freeport, Illinois, this 10th day of August, 2020. Congratulations, gentlemen. If I could please invite your spouses to the front to pin your badges. You can also remove your masks for the purpose of the photographs, of course. Thank you very much. I present to you Deputy Chief Scott Siegel, Lieutenant Chris Lowry, and District Chief Tom Corey. Thank you very much. Scott, go ahead.
I'd just like to thank City Manager Bucas, Mayor Miller, all the council members. This is a bittersweet 2 weeks for me. I buried both my parents in the last 14 days, and now here I am at the pinnacle of my career. The people that probably matter the most to me in the world are here tonight: my wife, my children, Katie, Alex, Hank, Dawn, my mentors, Scott Townsend, Mike McKenna, and all these great people that I work with on the fire department, and the people of this town that I work for. I truly am honored and humbled for this position, as I know Tom and Chris feel the exact same way. We feel the awesomeness of this responsibility, but we also know that and believe that Freeport's best days are truly in front of us for the city, our department, and all the people therein. And I thank you on their behalf and on mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief, and thank you to those serving, and congratulations, very well deserved. And Scott, you are in our thoughts and prayers in this difficult time in your family. Let's move to item number 8, discussion regarding the draft of comprehensive plan. I believe we have Leslie Roth on the line from Ratio. Leslie, are you able to hear us?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, it's your pleasure.
And okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
There we go.
How's that working?
Very good, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We put together a brief presentation that goes over the highlights of the draft comprehensive plan for the city of Freeport. Many of you have been engaged with this process over the last over a year now, and we're really thrilled with the level of participation and enthusiasm and momentum that has been built through the process. This slide really talks about the project goals, where we started with this project. We wanted to create a plan that really was visionary, that positioned Freeport for the future, that prioritized what was really important and valuable to stakeholders in the community, and while we were doing that, build organizational capacity and consensus. This process was structured with the input of 4 advisory committees that followed the process through and were made up of a very diverse group of stakeholders from the Freeport community. Lastly, and I really loved the invocation at the beginning of this meeting, talking about developing a framework for the future. With so much uncertainty that we've been faced with over the last several months, that seems to kind of never end and is probably weighing on a lot of our patience and faith. We really enjoyed working on this comprehensive planning process to really begin to envision the kind of future that the city wants to see. We identified 4 priorities for this plan. The most important ones is that we didn't want the community to have to repeat itself, and so we wanted to coordinate task plans and reports with best practices from the design team, from the consultant team, to make sure that specifically chronic infrastructure issues were addressed. We know this is going to be ongoing, and the city has a commitment to coming up with solutions that are equitable. So we wanted this to be a highlight of the plan. The second priority is really looking at how to strengthen the community with a focus on implementation. Freeport has gone through a number of challenges throughout the years, and will continue to face them, but we really feel optimistic and positive about the focus on implementation, how this document will help position the community to move forward and meet your expectations. Housing was another specific priority that was brought up by the community and reinforced by a variety of policies that look at the changing demographics of the community, how to attract additional population to Freeport, and how to respond to how the nature of the demographic is changing. And lastly, preparing you, the elected and appointed officials, stakeholders, agencies, organizations, faith-based communities, and all the folks that we talk to make sure that at the end of the comprehensive planning process, that there was an economic development strategy and organizational capacity that was built through this process. As I mentioned before, this has been quite a long process. We're very, very impressed with the level of commitment from the community that we've had. Our partnership with the city, with the advisory council, the advisory committees, and also different focus groups and participants from the community at large really, really made this plan successful. Starting in February, all the way of over a year ago, almost 18 months ago, was when we first had the kickoff. There's been a variety of public engagement opportunities. We'll go into that a little bit later in the presentation. But just to give you a sense of, and I know this is probably really small up on the big screen that you're looking at, but if you squint your eyes, you can see there's been a lot of touch points and a lot of effort and work that's been put into this plan. We're currently in the last phase. This is phase 4, where we have the remaining advisory committee meetings and final plan review and adoption. So how do we engage the public through this process? Oops, sorry about that. We did that in a variety of ways, and you'll see the big bubble on the side kind of talking about how many residents were actually engaged. It was actually through a variety of sessions that we had planned. There were 6 advisory committee meetings. Each advisory committee was made up from anywhere from 6 to 20 people, meeting throughout this comprehensive planning process in all phases. There were focus group conversations at the beginning of this process in phase one that included underrepresented groups such as youth and teenagers in the community who will be inheriting a legacy of the city. We thought their viewpoint and being able to shape their community was really important. We also talked to school leaders and administration, faith-based organizations, business community leaders, as well as other agencies and organizations in the city to begin to kind of create a holistic vision for the process. There were 2 workshops that we hosted at City Hall. There were also pop-up workshops. We appeared at Paint the Port and got to see the fantastic artistry of Freeport residents and visitors, as well as do a survey there. We collected almost 100 surveys at that particular event. There were city-led information sessions to report out at City Council and at other meetings hosted at City Hall to engage stakeholders in the process. And then, of course, there were council and commission presentations to keep you all up to speed on the progress of the comprehensive plan. As I mentioned, there were 4 advisory committees that kind of led the process. It included 48 members, and there were 6 meetings throughout the process. I'm going to go through each chapter and get into a little bit more detail about which parts of the comprehensive plan each advisory committee was specifically responsible for. But just to give you a sense that these were decided by the city prior to the comprehensive planning process, and those identified as advisory committee members represented the interests of each one of these specific topic areas or focus areas in the comprehensive plan. The advisory committees were really critical to this community-led process. Folks that participated on these communities were subject matter experts. They were leaders and champions for the plan. They brought people to the workshops. They engaged students. They helped connect us with who we should be talking to, which voices in the community were not being heard, and how we could do outreach. Also helped us with dissemination of meeting materials and brought the voice of the community with them in the actual advisory committee meeting. And lastly, they reviewed the documents. And this is, the comprehensive plan is over 100 pages. This is not, the thriller that you watch on Friday night. This is, policy, and some of the information can be, we know, not super exciting. So their diligence in reviewing these documents thoroughly and making sure that the policies and the strategies were, formal enough to be understood as enforceable policy, but familiar enough to be identifiable and relatable to stakeholders was a really careful balance that the advisory committees helped us with to set the tone of the comprehensive plan itself. The comprehensive plan is structured by an introduction. The whole first phase of the project was about data review and analysis. We really wanted to get a lay of the land before we started digging into goals and objectives. We needed to understand where the challenges and opportunities were in the city, what was working, what needed improvement, what were you really proud of, where were areas that maybe needed a little bit more concentrated effort, and then lastly, incorporation of those advisory committee goals. The advisory committees really helped us, the consultant team, write those goals, and that's why we really feel strongly about what was captured in the plan was a community-led process. Now I'm just going to go into a quick overview of the content of each chapter, and happy to answer any questions that you have at the end. Chapter 1 just gives you a sense of why we're doing this. Why are we doing the comprehensive plan? As most of you know, because we've been working through this process for over a year. Freeport is really at a very, very important time in its history, and now is really the right time to both evaluate where the city has come from, what's working, and what tools are needed to move the city forward into a future that is successful. This introductory chapter also talks about how to use the plan. We don't only want appointed and elected officials to use this comprehensive plan. We want residents of Freeport to actually feel connected to the topic areas and help the city with implementation. And there's a whole chapter on implementation where we identify specific groups and people to help the city do that. It's a very, very heavy lift, but this is a gigantic waste of everyone's time and energy. if it doesn't get implemented. So we really worked hard to identify those that could support implementation of those goals, and enforcement is also identified in how to use the plan. An introduction to Freeport, why Freeport is great, what we love about it, why it's so important in the region, and then engagement overview and who we actually engaged. The second chapter is more community profile. We wanted to make sure that the vision statement was clear, because every goal and strategy that we created through this process was going to be measured against the vision. Are we actually living that vision when we create this goal? The history is an important framework and benchmark for us to understand where that vision needs to be. And understanding the character and identity and preserving the unique culture of the city was also something that we wanted to capture in the second chapter. I actually put out the full community vision statement on this slide because folks worked really, really hard on it. And I want to read it out loud to you because this is something that should fill every community member in Freeport with pride, and this really sets the tone for the goals that come in later chapters. Freeport is a city of friendly citizens who envision a future that captures the hearts and minds of residents through creation of a family-friendly environment. Freeport prides itself in being a regional leader with a vibrant spirit, artistic and creative inspiration, and innovation focus. We envision a connected and engaged community with equitable services, access to high-quality housing options, and opportunities for success through personal and professional development. We value all community members and celebrate our community's diversity with inclusivity. I kind of got goosebumps. That was like, I really like that vision statement. So chapter 3 is land use, placemaking, economic development, public art, and cultural heritage. There was a lot of content that went into this chapter. This was led by Advisory Committee Group A, and it essentially goes through kind of what the physical makeup of the city looks like. We focus in on a few sub-areas in corridor planning. We know that you already have some corridor planning that is ongoing. We wanted to make sure that was included in the comprehensive plan as something that could be built upon in the future. To position the city for success, we wanted to identify local investment strategies and how that can connect to potential redevelopment in other parts of the city, and then really identifying kind of where the boundaries were and what makes Freeport unique with gateways and wayfinding. So this is one of the maps. Again, it's probably too small to see on the big screen, but it's to give you an idea of how we approached future land uses. There were not a lot of changes, but what we wanted to make sure and do is preserve areas that were functioning really well and provide flexibility with development in areas that maybe could change in the future. This is the sub-area planning. One of the areas was Chicago Avenue. There's been a lot of work on Chicago Avenue with the streetscape and the art plaza. It connects together a lot of different landmarks within downtown. So we thought that it was really important to highlight this area as an important one in downtown and really look at where those gateways and wayfinding and signage needed to be from a multimodal perspective. The area is also important and includes the WT Raleigh site. There's been master planning in that area for a number of years. We wanted to broaden that out a little bit to talk about other connections that were important. The Galena Business District, the Lincoln Douglas Debate Square, Art Plaza, streetscape improvements, and trailheads. Downtown really has a lot of really wonderful qualities, and with the improvement of Chicago Avenue and increased opportunity for bike tourism, downtown was another really important sub-area that we wanted to highlight in this comprehensive plan. The Lincoln site, as our economic development consultant, BDI, brought up, you know, the nature of retail is changing and has changed a lot, and COVID-19 has really sort of started accelerating how some of those habits have changed. So we wanted to take a look at Lincoln Mall as an opportunity site for how retail could be possibly redeveloped, or ideas for best practices that could be implemented throughout the city. But again, the WT Raleigh building There's been a lot of investment in this area, and looking at how wayfinding signage and access and connectivity could be strengthened to highlight the improvements that are being made on this site. The goals and objectives for this area for this chapter included diversifying the tax base. There's some specific policies related to the economic development strategy, and that is about redevelopment, looking at opportunities downtown, filling in potential vacancies, and also creating mixed-use opportunities. Looking at Freeport in a regional labor shed, we know talking to some employers that Freeport, is expanding, particularly in manufacturing and industrial, but also in innovation industries and entrepreneurship. So creating those strong business connections was very, very important. Freeport has always been, at the heart of arts and culture in the region, and really leveraging that and creating connectivity opportunities with bike and pedestrian and the park system to prioritize tourism in its existing waterways and connectivity with the parks. And then looking at innovative funding strategies. We know that this is, a really kind of turbulent and unstable time, but by thinking creatively about funding and kind of really conceptualizing short-term, mid-term, and long-term investment strategies, we think that the policies that were created in the comprehensive plan will be implementable. The next chapter focuses on utilities, public service, and transportation. Today we have 3 representatives from Gilwalt Hamilton Associates, our transportation and infrastructure consultant who supported Advisory Group B in putting together the goals and strategies for this chapter. This dealt a lot with transportation and sidewalk connectivity. We also looked at utilities and infrastructure. One of the policies was creating a stormwater master plan. Gilwalt Hamilton helped out with that. And then coordinating with the Park District master plan to create greater connectivity throughout the city and beyond regional trail systems with a functional bike and trail network. So this is just a couple of the diagrams and precedent images or analogy images we took a look at. One of the opportunities that we found is a focus on transit and how different kinds of transit can be implemented in a city the size of Freeport. One of the recommendations was e-scooters. This may be a long-term thing. We also know that there is at least one shared ride driver in the city of Freeport at the time we were meeting with our advisory committees. And we also know that transportation patterns and habits may change a little bit. And so we wanted to provide flexibility and some options for the city to grow. With the trail map, we coordinated again with the Park District Master Plan with existing trail systems, not only in the city, but regionally. We know that there is quite a bit of bike tourism already, and we wanted to make sure that trails led into the city so that there could be an increase in economic development activity in those areas. The park system in Freeport is beloved. Ratio also is working on the Park District Master Plan. My colleague who was working on that, we sat right next to each other. He's a landscape architect, and we talked a lot about how beautiful the park system is in Freeport and how much pride there is. And so really working on the comprehensive plan, coordinating those policy goals, and actually creating a trail and pedestrian system that was both safe, functional, and beautiful. So what were the goals and objectives for this chapter? We talked about improving the city's infrastructure. I know you're tired of hearing about flooding and stormwater, but we had to put it in the comprehensive plan just to make sure that, if there was more that needed to be done in the future, that we were prepared for that. Connecting paths and sidewalks was also really important, and really preparing for future mobility at the rates that previous generations were. So if we want Freeport to stay connected and to be an innovator and really cultivate entrepreneurs, we needed to think about those bike facilities and future mobility options. Chapter 5 focused on open space, parks, and natural resources. This was the focus of Advisory Committee Group C. This really looked at community resiliency, We looked at the Soul Smart designation, energy efficiency and conservation, and again, looking at some opportunities to coordinate with the Park District Master Plan. So this just gives you a sense of kind of one of the maps that was created out of that process, identifying the parks. And this particular map is interesting because it identifies how much of the city is actually covered, is within a quarter-mile walk of each one of the parks, which is the kind of gray or purple area that you see. So almost the whole city is covered within a quarter mile or a half mile, which is unusual and a real amenity and asset for Freeport. We also looked at best practices for riverfront and recreational strategies. Many times we think of areas that do flood or have, rain impact as problems for the community. We really wanted to look at what the opportunities were for Freeport to leverage those into amenities and create less of kind of a liability and more of an amenity for new development that could enter the city. So some of the goals and objectives here were identifying new park locations within the city that are currently underserved, expanding the existing facilities and programs, and really expanding the identity as a bike-friendly community. Chapter 6, this was housing, community facilities, health, and human services. Freeport, we learned throughout the public engagement process, and in our focus groups is very philanthropic, and there are actually a lot of social service and health-related service organizations within the community. We are very happy to see that and to hear that, and have their commitment in partnering on some of these policies to make sure that they were implemented. One of the maps that we created for this one was community facilities. You can see they're dispersed throughout the community, and that there is quite a bit of diversity within those organizations. We also looked at housing and what that means for Freeport moving forward. Most of the housing in Freeport is single family, but we do see an opportunity to leverage that into a few different types of housing models that would be a right fit for the city of Freeport. The comprehensive plan goes into great detail with the cost analysis for different types of housing. We know that there was aging housing stock, and that was one of the challenges that we had with developing housing policy. And we think that really sort of being innovative again and thinking differently about how homes could be repurposed or rehabilitated would benefit Freeport's growing population. Some of the goals and objectives here are transit options, increasing affordable housing, so looking at responsive housing for the demographic that lives in Freeport, and also encouraging, for example, young adults or young families to move into Freeport, and we're already seeing that migration in. We talked to several Freeport residents who moved away for college and then moved back to the community after college to start businesses. So we know that there's definitely a need for a variety of housing in the community. Looking at increasing interagency collaboration, there seems to be a real opportunity for these organizations to achieve increased levels of funding with collaboration, and so that was some of the policies that we wrote also, and looking at coordinating social justice and education efforts. The last chapter is about implementation. We really wanted to make sure that you, as the implementers of this plan, have the tools and resources that you needed to be successful. That includes accountability and ownership for the plan. We gave some instructions on how you can do this. It's looking at the plan on an annual basis, making sure that you are still working towards the goals. It's measuring the impact that you're having on the community. These are sometimes just quality of life. And then evaluating the progress that's made and coordinating with the partners that are identified in the implementation chapter. So I know that was a lot of information. The next steps really are, the adoption process and conversation about the final comprehensive plan, any last revisions that are needed, anything that you're seeing that we should, take another quick look at, and then moving forward with helping you do the real heavy lift, which is implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I really appreciate your time to present tonight. Could you introduce those who are with you on this call?
Absolutely. So today on the call, I have Lee McCarthy with Gaywalt Hamilton. I'm just taking a look here. Justin Office with Gaywalt Hamilton and Bill Reed. And again, Gaywalt Hamilton are transportation and infrastructure and natural resource consultants.
Thank you, Leslie. Council, do we have any discussion on this topic?
Chair,
Yes, Alderman Borneman.
thanks for the presentation, ma'am. I was just curious as to when a draft will be available for review for council, and I'm sorry if I missed that.
I believe that Kirsten was doing the distribution of that. And please correct me if I'm misspeaking, but I believe that that was happening this week.
Okay. Thanks.
Chair,
Yes,
thank you.
Alderman Brescia.
Thank you. Manager Bucus, are we looking to put this on one of the council agendas coming up soon?
Yes, we are. We're looking at next week's council meeting.
Thank you, sir. And I guess, I'm sorry, may I continue, Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Roth, can you hear me?
Yes.
I guess I'm looking at the big screen. I probably should look over here. It's kind of confusing here when we have these televised meetings. You were speaking of the land use, such as corridor planning, and you spoke of a sub-area. What is a sub-area? I'm not familiar with that term.
So there were a few specific areas in the city that stakeholders in the advisory committees wanted us to just take a closer look at. So in the slideshow, I mentioned the WT Raleigh development, Lincoln Mall, downtown, and Chicago Avenue. So we call those sub-areas because they're smaller than looking at the whole city, and we can go into a little bit more detail with recommendations in those areas.
That makes sense. Thank you. And Chair, may I go on?
Yes, please, go ahead.
And Ms. Roth, can you tell me who are the people on the advisory committees?
I can, those are actually all the advisory committee participants are listed in the draft plan. So their names are right there. You should have a copy of the plan. If you don't, we'll get one to you right away, and you'll see who was involved with the process.
I would appreciate that. Thank you, ma'am. That's all I have.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any further discussion, council?
Chair,
Yes, Alderman Borneman.
for Mr. Bucus, you're looking to have this on the next council agenda for what purpose? For adoption? Or,
Adoption.
okay. And that requires a motion, or is that something you can just put on as city manager?
I'm asking that basically that you forward it to the next council meeting, but that was my intention, was to put on the next council agenda and adopt it as an ordinance.
Council, do we have a motion to put this on our next council meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Alderman Busker, seconded by Alderman Ross. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. The ayes have it. So let's move ahead to item number 9.
Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Leslie. We appreciate all of your hard work, and I know this represents a lot of collaboration with many different leaders, so thank you for all of your work on that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks. So moving on to item number 9, we have the Freeport Housing Authority monthly report and also an update on Parkside. So I'd like to ask Babette to present for us tonight.
Thank you. I first want to begin by just sharing with you all. A few weeks ago, city leadership, myself, our board, our senior leadership staff, as well as the HUD field office, had a conference call. And the purpose of this conference call was to talk about our recovery plan as a housing authority. And I'm bringing this up because of the fact that there's been a lot of hard work going into this recovery process. And when it comes down with, to the financials, we've already talked about the progress we've made with our financials. Management would report on that on a regular basis in physical, in terms of how we're able to turn our units. Capital planning, that's in progress with our RAD P&A that's occurring. And this is all done in addition to building board capacity, as well as the work that we've been doing to submit a demolition disposition application. So I just wanted to share that with you, and the fact that I really do appreciate HUD taking the time to talk with city leadership and share, so you don't just have to hear it from me, that we're actually making substantial progress, and that comes from good staff as well as a good decision-making board. So I just wanted to share that with you. Part of the document that you have in the recovery plan, and you all are at this point familiar with the various areas of the recovery plan. The first area related to governance, I have shared with you all a schedule of upcoming trainings that focus on board development, and also will support our ability to begin strategically designing the next 5-year plan. And that plan is primarily going to focus on capital needs. As I just mentioned, we just finished our physical needs assessment. We are waiting on the report. I do want to be able to share the cost-benefit analysis with you all when we have that completed. And we'll also be bringing the board together in some other planning aspects to make certain that they completely understand each step that it will take to develop that 5-year plan. But also wanted to say, in terms of governance and the trainings that we have listed, it's so important that these trainings are high level, that will support decision making. And then we're also going to do additional consultation with the board to ensure that when the time comes to begin doing our strategic plan, that they have the tools that they need and understanding of the next moves that we need to make as a housing authority. In terms of physical, the last time I was here, I did share with you an update of our Section 18 application. And I also shared with you that we were at the point where the application is in the Special Application Center, and we're finding out that we cannot use special application funds for demolition when there's no redevelopment. Now, one thing that I want to explain is that when you submit a Section 18 application or any type of application to the Special Application Center, it's a phased process that often, unless you're working through it, and particularly when you're working through it the first time, some things come up that you don't expect. But that phase went through the contractors that we worked with, the assessments that needed to be done, the consultation with the field office, and finally getting to the SAC office, where some of the big questions come in. And that was one of the questions. We all know where Parkside is located. We all know that HUD is not able to invest in housing in the floodway. So other decisions have to be made. And those decisions go through a variety of different channels. So our conversation with city leadership was about, because there is an indeterminate amount of time for the planning or whatever planning measures that will occur for Parkside, was it possible, is it possible for the city to take over the property? And would you have the time to apply for grants? Now, that's a hard decision to make immediately. And the one thing that HUD actually realized as well is that no matter what, we still have to get these vouchers in the hands of the residents. So we're going to continue. HUD is going to assist me in additional grants, possibly contracts, emergency funds, funds that will support demolition. But in the meantime, we are working towards getting those vouchers out. Now, again, I'm waiting for the last step, which is the certification going to DC. And once that happens, and once we get the letter in the hands, we can bring in the proper agencies to begin the counseling with the residents and providing them with support in their relocation process. So, and it has been difficult because, you know, when you spring on a family or a community that, well, we're going to relocate you, and they see the school closing, and we're trying to avoid them experiencing another flood event, everybody wants everything to happen right then. And if it was up to me, and if I could change that process in terms of how we educate and inform people of the process, that's something that I wouldn't mind contributing to. But I want you all to know, as well as we try to share with the housing community, is that we're giving you all the information that we have, and HUD has informed some of the residents that call, you know, we're working on it. We're working on it. And again, their vouchers will be similar to housing choice vouchers. Section 8, they will be able to use those vouchers just like they would use any other Section 8 voucher any place in the country. So again, once we have that final word, we'll be sharing that with you all, and we'll be providing the community with the support that they need in order to be able to move forward effectively. A few other things that you do have in your report is related to some financial highlights. Ending the month of June 30th, the agency was about almost $49,000 better. And we had originally planned in our fiscal year budget that we would probably have an income about $14,000. For us to be better than budget, some of the contributions are related to the CARES Act dollars that we received to support COVID responses, as well as the increased proration percentage from HUD related to our operating subsidy. There has been an increase in the use of contractors for unit turn at Westview. We are about $22,000 over budget because we're using more contractors. We're not hiring additional maintenance guys. We have about 3 full-time maintenance people who really pretty much coordinate the unit turn, as well as responding to additional needs of work orders and repairs and things like that. So, but in order for us to be able to move people forward, move that application process forward, we still need to get those units turned at Westview. Does anyone have any questions?
Chair?
Yes, Alderman McClenathan.
Thank you. Director, thank you very much again for both the written and then the verbal updates in regards to that. And I had a couple questions that we talked about beforehand, and I appreciate you kind of addressing those. And I guess just I appreciate the update in regards to the city position, and then how we're looking to handle that in regards to the property in themselves and the demolition. I guess going forward, in addition to what you're already providing on here, if you could just continue to keep us informed. I know you've talked about what are the options for individuals. Obviously, they're, with the Section 8, it's anywhere in the U.S., but also For if the individuals do wish to stay in the Freeport area here, what are we doing to make sure that we provide them all the options and the resources? You explained some of that when we talked here. I just would just note that kind of as an ongoing kind of question, I guess, as we go forward through this process. And I realize we're still relatively early at some stages of this process. So thank you.
Yes, and I will also say that once the vouchers are issued, we'll have a better understanding of the different locations individuals are looking, at, whether they're looking for landlords here in this area, or even for those who may be interested in staying in public housing, if we're able to relocate them to Westview. So we're looking at all of those options.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, please.
I just want to kind of clarify something about our meeting on July 28th. It was our understanding that HUD was asking us to use our pre-disaster mitigation money that we're hopefully getting, we still haven't gotten final word yet, this year, to buy and demolish the Parkview apartments. At that time, we said we were not interested in doing that because we already had 140 plus people that are on our list that we submitted with that application. We also stated that we weren't interested in buying the property for less than fair market value because we're buying something just to tear it down. That didn't make sense to us. We did talk a little bit about future grants and that we would, not the second round, but probably our third round of funding requests, look for some kind of funding in that respect. And so it's not that we're not willing to partner with you. We are. As a matter of fact, we've been in contact. You want to know whether the city would be willing to buy the property for $104,000, I believe, and then you would try to find the money to demolish those properties. And that's not out of question yet, but we just don't have city funds, nor do we have federal funds to do that. But that is something that we're still looking at doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second question, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Manager Begas.
Is that in your report too, you mentioned that you may be looking for some HACF funds for short-term to help balance your shortfall in funds?
Oh, yes, we actually received information from HUD that we were eligible to apply for shortfall funds. And those funds would be available to support building our reserve. So ensuring that we have at least 2 months of reserve in the bank.
Would you have to pay those funds back then in the future? Or?
No, no.
Okay, that's perfect.
No,
Beautiful.
it actually is for us, and the fact that we are in the middle of a recovery plan, is to help stabilize our funding.
Very good, thank you.
Chair.
Yes.
So the last conference call that Manager Buchanan and I had with Babette and several that were on the HUD, we weren't sure what the topics were that we were going to be discussing, so I was a little nervous about that. And I have to say thank you, Babette, because their main concern was that there was a change in the bylaws for the committee, the board to be removed if they did not comply with training, which I think is great and easy to fix. So the only thing that they suggested was that one little change, and so what an easy fix. And so thank you for that, and I just see continuing progress, so thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Very good. Council, do we have any further discussion on the monthly reports? Okay. Seeing none, would you like to move on to the next item? I believe the Parkside update was it was also an attachment for
Oh,
this?
yes, I kind of merged it in one
Okay.
presentation, but
Okay.
did anyone have any questions about that? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, nothing further. Thank you so much for your hard work presenting for us tonight. So next, no action to be taken on this, but we do thank you for this report. We'll move on to item number 10. This is a discussion on our pension obligation bonds. So tonight we'll have a presentation by Stephen Roberts. Or you will, okay. Thank you, Manager Bucas.
Hopefully Stefan's on the, is watching.
I am on, Randy.
Okay, thank you.
Very good.
Okay. At our March 2nd, 2020 Committee of the Whole meeting, the council discussed an option to fund the police and fire pension liability through a taxable bond issue. And it was felt at that time that a 22-year bond could be issued for around 3.7% on average. At that meeting, we also were discussing a range of about $48 to $49 million. I think at that time our actuary said it was about $49.5 million is what we had in our general liability. But with the COVID-19 and the volatility in the markets, we decided not to proceed at that time. Likewise, our portfolio also went down, and there was quite a bit of instability, and it also created some greater liability for us, and we weren't quite sure what was going to take place. Since that time, our values have gone up, the markets has gone up, and I think we're pretty close to where we were on January 1st of this year. Our current liability is now in the range of somewhere between $53 and $55 million. And although interest rates were very low at the height of the coronavirus, they are still at historic lows of about 2.6%. We currently levy $2,487,000 in property taxes to pay for police and fire and IMRF pensions. By borrowing $55 million, our first year payment would be roughly $2.9 million. This amount is approximately $413,000 greater than what we're currently levying, and does not include the $278,000 in property taxes that goes to pay for the IMRF contribution. If we were to levy the full bond payment requirement, a Freeport home valued at $100,000 would see their property taxes go up approximately $67. The current bond payments are structured to increase by $100,000 per year. If our equalized value assessment did not increase but remained stable, each year the property tax would be going up about $16.24 to make up for that increase in our debt service payment. Besides our current general liability that we have, our outstanding liability, we also have our normal costs for the police and fire pension funds. Updated figures from our actuary currently place this liability at about $525,000 for fire and $414,000 for police. Currently, part of our electric tax goes to the fire pension fund. After 1 year of collecting the electric tax, staff is projecting an annual collection of about $387,000 per year. This will leave the city approximately $138,000 short of funding our normal costs for the fire pension fund. Likewise, staff is estimating that we have a tax on the natural gas that goes towards our police pension funds. And staff is estimating that the gas tax would generate about $370,000 annually. So this will leave about a $44,000 deficit each year for the police pension fund. The city is also projecting to receive about $400,000 in personal property replacement tax, also known as PPRT. That amount has been going down as the state's been taking more and more of that money to fund state operations. However, we can use the $182,000 from the personal property replacement tax to meet the normal cost contribution of both the police and fire funds, and still have approximately $238,000 to meet our IMRF obligations. Currently, IMRF obligations are roughly $400,000 per year. That's a quick synopsis of what we've been talking about and what we're proposing. In your packet, you had a schedule that Baird has put together for us that kind of outlines what our bond payments would be. And myself and Stefan would be open to any questions that council may have.
Chair,
Yes, Alderman McClanton.
thank you. The current projected 53.76 million unfunded liability, what's the latest figure that we use to project that? Where do we get that figure from?
We got that from Lauterbach and Amon, our actuaries.
And how recent of a snapshot was that?
Stefan, how recent was that? A couple weeks ago?
I don't know if
It was
I'm
recent.
sorry, I'm here. Was that question to me?
Yes.
Could you repeat it?
How long ago did Lauterbach and Amon give us our current liability of the 53 point?
What we try to do for this is not to exceed 55 million is for the parameters ordinance. So what we try to do is stress that number and do a higher number than the actual. And we asked Lauterbach and Amon to stress the number and give us a not to exceed, and they came up with $55 million. I'm thinking with where the stock market, and this is just me saying it, I think it's going to be lower than that. But they provided that number in direct response to your question in the spring of this year.
Follow up.
Yes, Alderman McClanton.
Okay, because to cut to the chase on it, when we were here earlier, I mean, what were we at? A 48 million number we were looking at? And I realize obviously, I mean, within a couple of weeks after the last presentation within 2 weeks, I think, of the last presentation is when the major hit took place. We're really close in regards to the overall funds that we already are applying towards that, plus what it would take for our normal operating cost and this debt service. However, we're a little higher than I'm comfortable with. And so that's why I'm wondering what kind of flexibility do we have between the 48 million number and the 55 million number. I appreciate you're trying to be a little more conservative so that we don't shoot too low and not have the funds to do what we're looking to do in regards to the funding ratio. But, I mean, when you say we got those numbers in the spring, I mean, were those mid-April numbers? Were those mid-May numbers? Things of that nature. So where I'm going with this is I fully understand the concept. I fully understand the idea that if the assumptions are met, you could save upwards of $29 million over the life of this. And all the other underlying assumptions on it. I'm just wondering what kind of little room we have here, because I'm not comfortable levying additional taxes at this time unless there are no other viable options. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. I'll defer to other
And Randy,
questions.
if I can say one thing, is this is for a legal authorization, and just how it works is, let's say, we're pricing in a month or two, if you decide to move forward with this, is you can't increase the amount, but you can always lower it. So when we say not to exceed 55 million, we can always lower that amount, and we would, to your actual unfunded liability at the time of pricing. It just gives you the legal authorization in case something goes against you to not have to bring it back and have discussion.
Understood. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Rick, interrupted you.
No. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Stefan, for the clarification. Council, do we have
Thank
further
you.
discussion?
Chair,
Questions? Yes, Alderman Boardman.
Director Bucus, this is staff's recommending I guess, let me rephrase that. Are you recommending that we proceed on this plan?
I think at the present time we should, and I'm also recommending that we look at raising the property tax to meet our debt obligation on this as well. In the past, we used to levy a part of our corporate tax levy for general purposes, and that money went directly to the pensions. So a couple of years ago, we decided not to levy any corporate money for general operating procedures because that was all going to pensions. And so that's where it's going right now, is strictly to pensions. And I don't want to put us in the same situation that the state of Illinois is in, that we kick it down the road year after year, we're going to face this pension eventually. And, you know, I think right now, actually back in March or actually in January would have been the best time to do it. But, you know, even looking at what we're looking at now, if you look back at March, we're looking at basically the same amount of money, our payment-wise, as we are today, because interest rates had dropped from when we were first looking at. So even though it looks like a lot of money, and it is, $55 million is a lot of money, it's the payment schedule is almost exactly the same as was back in March when we were looking at $48, $49 million, just because interest rates are less.
I have a follow-up.
Yes, Alderman Borneman.
So I have at least one. You said you're doing this would require the increase in property taxes to go towards, you said, the corporate taxes for general purposes. Can you explain that?
No. What I'm proposing is that all of our current, as it's currently done right now, our entire tax levy would go towards pensions, police and fire pensions.
And that's not how it's done currently?
Right now, it goes toward police, fire, and IMRF. But we're going to have to do something with IMRF.
Chair,
Yes, Alderman McClancy.
and to touch on that portion, Alderman Borneman, like when I first started here, and obviously Alderperson Bradshaw has even longer history on that, when we were levying our property taxes, wasn't too far off of this $2.48 million figure, but it used to be that the portion that went to pensions didn't eat it all up. And so there was some leftover. I mean, in fact, like 4 or 5 years ago, it was like 400,000 left over that could have gone to general corporate purposes. I mean, anything else, you know, roads, police, whatever it is in regards to that. But it's gotten to the level with the unfunded liability that our entire levy of the property taxes has been being applied towards just pensions. So it's been a drain on our overall general fund there. Did that help at all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
If I also may say, the 2.4, almost $2.5 million that we levy in property tax each year, that's been pretty stable for at least 4 years. We really haven't increased it. The only time it's been increased is when our assessed value has gone up. And that's just recently that's been gone up. And if you look at your property taxes this year, you'll notice that our rate actually went down a little bit because we underestimated the increase in assessed value.
Chair?
yes, Alderman McClancy.
Just for context as a whole, and this will be a repeat for many of you, but you never know in regards to the public when this is the first time that they're seeing this issue. So, we got 3 pension systems: IMRF, police, and fire. IMRF is highly stable in regards to its funding rates, and it has been, and it's largely due to the structure and how it was set up and state mandated, kind of a pay-as-you-go, if you will. Our police and fire pension systems are not near 100% funded ratio. And when I say 100% funded, I mean the amount that the actuaries say is reasonably needed to meet the future obligations, looking at how many people do we have on the force, what's the projected life expectancy, what's the projected rate of return, and also what are the expected increases. And they put that into a formula and say, this is what we think you're going to need for this down the road. Our projected assets, and Manager Bucas could give us probably a more updated number, but last time I saw it, it was somewhere in the mid 40 millions in regards to what we had actually funded. But the actuary said, with not regarding that in the bank, we still had an unfunded liability or obligation of somewhere in the ballpark of 48 or maybe up to 50, 52 million, somewhere in that range that we've got here now. The Illinois Supreme Court has said that due to the 1970 Constitution, the obligations for current employees or past employees cannot be infringed upon due to the nature of our Constitution. Therefore, as it stands today, but for some pension reform that does pass constitutional muster. This is an obligation that the city is looking at having to meet at some point in the time down the road, one way or the other. The only question is, how do you address that unfunded liability? Our projected rate of return is 6 3/4 or 6.5?
6.5.
Okay, 6.5%. So when you have a $50 million unfunded liability, for every year that that money is not earning the investment return, the actuaries tack on that 6.5%, saying you're not meeting that cost, which is causing our liability to grow. Which is why, even though we've taken steps in the past 3 or 4 years to address and increase our funding for pensions, we're still not substantially making ground on the issue, leaving us with this shortfall. The idea of doing the pension obligation bonds is that we would have this, these bonds, I'm just going to use a figure, let's face 50 million or 55 million. We'll say 55 million just for purposes of this. I realize that's not to exceed, but 55 million. That money is bonded out. Those proceeds are applied to the pension system, which theoretically, if we're doing it correctly, will get us to that 100% funding level. Now, in regards to that 100% funding level, we also have our normal year-on-year operating costs based on how many people we have currently drawing from the pension and some administrative costs. Correct so far?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I'm going to keep going.
Yep.
So when we have those obligations, instead of having the $55 million unfunded liability that it is accruing at 6.5% and growing at a 6.5% rate, we're getting to a 100% funded rate with a locked-in bond of that same amount at 2.5%. To the extent that our market returns exceeds 2.5% over this lifetime of repaying repaying these bonds, the taxpayers would achieve a savings in regards to that. To the extent that it takes our assumed savings of the 6.5% versus the 2.5%, they're projecting a savings of just about 29.4 million. So, and we've also had it told to us in the past that we've never had a 20-year period whereby our annualized rates of returns have gone below 2.5% on here. Actually, they were saying 3.7, but it's still obviously the same factor remains. And furthermore, if we did have returns over that period of time, let's say we didn't take the step and we did have returns over the time that were less than that, our assumed rate of return is 6.5%, so our unfunded liability is going to continue to grow even if we don't take this step. This gives us a tool to leverage a locked-in rate that is very low and pay it off at that low rate versus paying it off over the next 20 years at that assumed higher liability. And currently, the state has a mandate that we reach a certain funding threshold, 90%, by 2040
Yes.
at this time. Now, whether the legislature changes that or not down the road, we don't know. But operating under the facts that we have here today, that's why we're looking at the idea of doing this pension obligation bond to get us to a funded ratio and then pay it off over that 20-year period at this fixed lower rate, as opposed to having it just accumulate higher and higher and higher, and having us get in a scenario which other Illinois municipalities have found themselves in, whereby they've had to drastically cut services by upwards of a third in regards to police and fire, and furthermore, having the treasurer intercept some of their payments that were due to the municipality and having them applied by that because they've gotten their pension systems into a snowball that they can't really get out of. So for all those reasons, that's what we're looking at doing, and that's why, even though it's a substantial financial obligation on the part of us here, if operated correctly and the minimum assumptions are even met, it should save us a substantial amount of money over this 20-year period. Did I misrepresent anything
No,
in that process?
that is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
Mr. Chair,
Yes. Yes, Alderman Brescia.
thank you. I just want to thank Alderman McClanathan. He gave an excellent summary. We appreciate your words, sir.
Yes.
Is this an action item?
So, Manager Bucas, do you have a recommendation on this action?
Yes, my recommendation is that we move forward. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It'll take, probably 2 months to go through the whole process. And during that time, we'll see what the interest rates are like. We'll be able to see how much our actual liability is. And then at the time we go to sell the bonds, council could pull the plug at any time.
Okay. So council, based on the presentation that was circulated on this agenda tonight, were there any questions related to the presentation while we have Stephen on the line?
I have a question, but it's probably for the city manager more than Stephen.
Okay, sure. Alderman Borneman.
Manager, if we don't act on this, wouldn't things continually to get worse over time?
Yes.
And wouldn't we, as things got worse, and that's kind of a vague term, but wouldn't we eventually need to raise property taxes to pay for the increasing deficit?
Eventually, you're going to have to either increase property taxes or look at laying people off because you're going to be short of the funds you need to meet your pension obligations. Or look at other areas of how you could raise money. And I think we did that already with the gas and electric tax. That's one reason why we raised it, because we were falling short on the pensions, and we needed to come up with additional funding.
What would be the benefit of not proceeding? Can you think of any benefit, less risk, I guess, of you don't take out this large amount of money or bond?
Yeah, definitely less risk, because anytime you borrow money, especially in this environment, and this amount, you can come down to the point where you're spending more than what you would have otherwise. But as Alderman McClanathan pointed out, our history, we've never been, below 0% on a return, because that's possible too. I mean, you could have some negative returns, but they've always bounced back, and we've been in the close to the 6.5 or better, 7% range, and the overall average of our investments.
So it sounds like if we were to do this and investments stay the same, the return stays, let's say 6.5%, or that would, excuse my unfamiliarity with this subject matter, but that we'd be in a much better position, right? Even if we did this, even rates don't go up, they stay at 6.5 returns, we would be in a much better position and eventually save close to $30 million over the course of 20 years.
Right, because we'd still be saving 4% each year, and that's where the $29 million comes in. The difference between the 6.5 and the 2.5, 2.6. It's a risk. I mean,
right.
It's a risk, and we're putting that risk on our children's.
Chair?
Yes, Alderman Burberry.
An observation. A lot of folks I know complain extensively about the state of Illinois and the legislature kicking the can down the road. We have an opportunity here to at least pick up the can. We may not like what it costs. It will cost us some more money in taxes, but it's better than kicking the can down the road, because down the road it's going to cost a lot more from everything I can see. And I think that's what we're alluding to here. The benefit is to do it now, lock in your cost, lock in your interest rate, suffer your pain now, as opposed to 15 years down the road when the state demands, or 20 years down the road when the state demands, we have to come up with the funds. The city goes broke because there won't be the funds to do that. Maybe that's an extreme example statement, but I think we should look at it in that light. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Burberry. Further discussion, council?
Sure.
Yes, Alderman McClanathan.
I just note, looking at the payouts here, if we were to take that same approach of meeting our statutory obligation and just meeting it by regular payments and not doing it through this bonding process, this year alone would require over $700,000 more on here. In 8 years from now, when the when our debt service payment stabilizes and levels off for the rest of the term, it would be over $1 million more. And then by the time you got to that last year, if you were to pay it off in that same 20-year period, this proposal would have required us to be contributing $3 million more just in 1 year. That's by trying to meet it through the steps that we've already done so far. Just kind of handling it on our own and trying to make it up. And one of the reasons that I feel like this is significantly more low risk than the option of continuing the path that we've gone is we did take that step in regards to the utility tax and generating about another $750,000 annually on it. And we found that was not really moving the needle in regards to this this unfunded liability due to some of the different assumptions that were made over the last year, as well as the rate of return on there. So this will give us a much greater chance of, it will leverage these dollars in a much better way than just continuing to pay or continuing to try to meet it as we go process.
Thank you, Alderman McLanathan. I think we've had a really good discussion today, and I know we've discussed this topic in past meetings. It does seem that we have a lot of things in our favor to really be considering this. So is it the pleasure of the council to add this as an agenda item in our next meeting?
So moved. Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Alderman Busker, seconded by Alderman Burberry to add this to our next council meeting.
Chair, I do have one more question for Mr. Roberts, if he's still on the line.
Yes.
I'm still on.
Okay. As proposed here, since we're not using this as a budget gimmick under the way that it's structured, but actually a defined plan to meet the obligation and not used to basically fund our operating costs in a given year. So as structured, it's believed that this would not have any impact, or certainly not a negative impact on our bond rating. Is that correct?
Well, it's a very interesting question because there's right and wrong ways to do a deal. And rating agencies look, there's red flags that you could get involved in. And those red flags really revolve around is budgetary relief. You're funding normal costs, or you're taking savings up front. What we do, what we specialize in, what we're going to do for you is make sure we structure this very conservatively. Like I mentioned, we did one for Winnebago County. The structure that you have chosen is a very conservative structure. We'll also ask you, Randy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll do a pension funding policy. And another thing is a budget stabilization. So long story short, we're going to structure this where you have a debt of $50 million, whatever it is, 55, 49, and you're making it better. And that's the argument we're going to make. You can't promise you're not going to face a downgrade, but rating agencies tend to be neutral because you're replacing a debt with a lower yielding debt at 2.5%. So to answer your question, one of our missions is to make sure that we structure this conservatively where they're not going to ding you with your rating.
Thank you.
Thank you, council.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to thank Mr. Roberts, if you're still online, for your explanations and for giving us plenty of paperwork to go over and help us understand exactly what's going on. Thank you, sir.
It's my pleasure, and I hope you guys have a nice evening.
Thank you, council, and Mr. Roberts, city manager. I really appreciate the hard work on this, that really it is a matter of setting the city up for success in the future as we consider these unfunded liabilities.
You still have a motion on the floor yet?
Yes. So with the motion, we had a motion on the floor, and I'd like to take a voice vote. All those in favor to move this on to the next the next scheduled meeting?
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, motion passes. This will be added on to the next scheduled meeting. Again, thank you, Stephen, for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Let's now move on to item number 11. We have a discussion regarding ordinance amending various provisions of Part 16, Fire Prevention Code regarding fire codes and burning ordinance. Chief Liggett.
Thank you, Chair. The current adopted fire code is not up to date with the currently adopted building code. We're building buildings that are based on the 2012 code and enforcing the fire maintenance code under the 2009 version of the International Fire Code. The codes are designed by the International Code Council to be concurrent and have code provisions across the board. So whether it's plumbing code or electrical code or the fire code, they're all designed to interwork with each other. So what I'm asking you to do in the near future is to adopt the 2012 code. What this will do is give us a concurrent code that provides unity across the code document consistent within the expectations for building code and fire code enforcement. In addition, the 2015 and 18 building and fire codes have been issued by the International Code Council. At this time, the city has no desire to move forward with those codes. However, we would like to reach up to the 2018 code to adopt regulations pertaining to the fire code enforcement of mobile food production and sales, like food trucks and trailers. We would like to discard our previous ordinance on burning and adopt the 2012 version of our open burning regulation in the International Fire Code. So what does that do for us? Basically, there are some changes. The 2009 version had an 8-foot requirement. This is now a 15-foot requirement. There's some other safety things that are available to us in the fire code that isn't available in our current burning ordinance. Also, one of the things that I would like to change, I know that previously we wanted cut hardwoods was identified in our city ordinance. In this particular situation, you know, when you're beginning to kindle a fire, you don't just throw a bunch of hardwood on it. And I would rather have someone in the community kindle a fire with small twigs and sticks from their yard instead of pouring some kind of fuel on it. It's a much safer, lower emission fire if we utilize those small twigs and branches. The size and type or the size of those fuels shouldn't exceed the size of the container in which it's being burned. And then the rest of the burning ordinance reads relatively the same. The remainder of the language within the ordinance that you have in front of you is all administrative in nature. It references our above ground and below ground storage tank program, the installation of large petroleum tanks, things like that, where we permit those according to the zoning ordinance. So our city attorney has reviewed all of those comparisons to make sure that the administrative adopted language that you see here meets our zoning and code for those types of tanks. Otherwise, the mobile food preparation is a big deal. It seems to be a business model that's accelerating in our community and nationwide. So pulling that regulation into our fire code gives us a little bit more teeth in making sure that those vendors are remaining safe and preparing food in a healthy way for our community. So if you have any questions, I'd entertain them at this time.
Thank you, Chief Liggett.
I had a question.
Alderman Barneman.
How does you mentioned the twigs and burning, how does that differ from what the code currently reads?
Our ordinance doesn't allow it. Our current ordinance does not allow that. Our current defines very specifically several different types of hardwoods, and only cut wood. It wouldn't allow the use of kindling to start the fire.
Okay, and a follow-up question?
Yes.
Yes, Alderman Barnett.
So this would allow the burning of twigs, sticks, and leaves under certain situations, or not leaves?
With or without leaves attached to the sticks.
Okay,
Not yard waste, not grass clippings, not bagged leaves, not raked leaves. Those are not permitted. Yard waste is defined in the ordinance also.
thank you.
Chair.
Yes, Alderman Ross.
Yes, Fire Chief. Are we speaking of a fire pit that the citizens have in their backyard or front yard that they're using, or are we speaking of just a outright burn?
What's permitted in the burn ordinance is what you just described, a fire pit that's manufactured for the purpose of kindling a fire, a recreational fire. It could be either something that's metal and manufactured with an ember screen and lid and all that, or it could be something that's built into the ground by stone and that type of fire pit.
Follow up.
Yes, Alderman Ross.
So just to make it clear, we're not speaking of leaves or anything like that?
No, those will still be permitted. You are prohibited. excuse me.
Prohibited, yes. That's why I
Let me
meant,
get the right word in there, prohibited. Burning leaves and yard waste will still be prohibited.
okay, thank you, Chief.
Sure.
Yes, Alderman McClathan.
I saw the paragraph about mobile food preparation vehicles and adopting the code. What is the practical changes by adopting that code?
Well, the earlier versions of the code, in fact, the 2009, 12, and 15 did not have any provisions in there for food service, fire prevention, and mobile food service preparation. Typically, those venues require some type of exhaust hood and extinguishment unit within the unit to suppress a fire should one start. As you can imagine, if they're using anything with grease-laden vapors, deep fryers, flat tops, anything like that that has a grease-laden vapor, there's a very high probability, especially in mobile food preparation because you're using propane for your heating source, to have a flame up of those grease-laden vapors. So it's very important to have a hood system to remove the vapors from the trailer, and then also an extinguishment system that's automatic in the system should a fire occur.
Sure. Follow?
Yes, Alderman McClathan.
Are those two, or how does that differ from what our current what our current ordinance says and how we've been handling it?
Well, right now, our current code doesn't have anything in it. There wasn't covered by anything, and in the NFPA code, which we don't have adopted here, the NFPA code covered it with surface cooking area. So if you got over a certain amount of surface cooking area, then you were required to have a hood system and extinguishment system. The International Fire Code doesn't cover it that way. They cover it from a different perspective from a hazard analysis perspective. So that's how we're dealing. We don't have that available to us now, so when we adopt it 2018, we will have that available to us.
Madam Clerk or Manager Bucus, is this something that, if adopted, then will get incorporated into our licensing or permit provisions here? Or how are we going to incorporate this?
It would be part of the whole licensing process that
Okay.
the fire department would inspect the food trucks and as
We're inspecting the food, I'm sorry, Alderman, we are inspecting those food trucks now through the permitting process. And we're making sure they have a fire extinguisher and, that they have, all of their propane lines and all the LPG lines and everything are all safe, and the tanks are chained, and they have all the things in place that they need to, that we have the ability to look at. Having this ordinance moving forward will give us some more teeth on some of the other items.
Sure. Thank you all.
Chair again?
Thank you. Yes, Alderman Ross.
I may have missed something here, but on the food truck, the only thing that's required, as for, it's not like a restaurant, they have the answering system, the hood deal. But the only thing that's required is a fire extinguisher, and that's it?
Right now, that's all that's required, but in the future, there could be a requirement depending on the type of cooking and things like that, a hood system.
What about a, follow-up?
Yes, sir.
What about a, when they're using the propane, what about a, like a carbon dioxide detector?
Carbon monoxide detector?
Yes.
That I wouldn't know off the top of my head. I'd have to research that as to the requirements of the code.
But the main reason why I brought that up, because like you said, they're using propane, and if they get a leak in the line, boof,
Sure,
you know, it goes up. I'm just wondering.
sure. I'm not aware off the top of my head without researching the code.
Okay, thank you, though.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Alderman Busker.
Yeah, Chief, is there any, I know why, I know why we're not going up to the 2018 in a whole, but is that gonna complicate anything, just drawing one code down from that and adopting it to ours instead of adopting the whole code as a unit?
That's a very good question, because the codes are designed to be integrated. This is a specialty piece, so there's nothing in the food truck code that's impacted by the building code or our normal commercial structures. Everything that we have under those codes remains the same. So,
thank you.
This special reach up is important because again, they're becoming more and more frequent, and they're typically at events where there are larger crowds, post-COVID, hopefully, larger crowds, and fairs and community events, things like that.
Chief, we really appreciate you presenting today. It sounds as though you've given this a good research to really be fit for purpose, and so I'm understanding you would like to see this ordinance to move forward.
Yes, I will be taking this to the building commission. They have to make sure that they have to approve the building portions of the fire code, which they've already done in approving the 2012 code. So this is just advisory mostly. We did begin last December with the building commission a review of the 2015 and 18 codes, and we believe that it was too much of a reach up at that point in time to go that far. I will bring to the building commission at some point in time a recommendation to move to the 2021 code, which is the next level, and hopefully we will have the ability to do that in the future. But that's going to be down the road. The 2021 code is under review right now. There's a 3-year review cycle. And then they'll publish that review and then code comparison, and then the building commission could look at that to see where they wanted to go. Now, the nice thing about Illinois and the home rule, as long as we maintain home rule, we will have the ability to carve out sections of that code that the community wants to have maybe some other performance code available, whether it's sprinklers or firewalls and things like that. So there is the ability to carve out some of those sections.
Okay, Chief, so if you could explain then the proposed timing of this? It sounds that you would like to have some discussion with Building Commission.
Sure. I would like to bring this forward to our next council meeting for your vote. The commission will see it tomorrow. They've heard all of this. Tomorrow would, Wednesday will be their approval.
Okay.
And then it'll be on your next council agenda for recommended for approval.
Okay.
Chair,
Yes, Alderman Borneman.
just one more question or clarification.
Absolutely.
I'm looking at the ordinance, and under miscellaneous, this is page 4 and 5, section 307.6, subparagraph, I think it's B3, or BC, B1C. Acceptable fuels for recreational fire shall be twigs, small branches with, and it says or are, as in the collective,
That's-
like,
I noticed that too when it's a typo. It should be or.
but I guess maybe I misunderstood your answer earlier. So small branches with or without leaves is acceptable fuel for recreational fire.
For instance, if I had a twig that had fallen off of the tree that had leaves retained on it, I wouldn't be required for you to pull the leaves off and discard them another way. You could burn those as kindling is the explanation there.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Alderman Brascia.
thank you. I would like to make a motion to move this to the next council meeting, August 17th.
Second.
So we have a motion by Alderperson Brascia, seconded by Alderman Busker. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. Moving on to agenda item 12, we have a discussion on the redevelopment agreement with real estate affiliates regarding the former Kmart building. Manager Bucus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. City staff's been working with real estate affiliates and Alan Gottlieb on a development proposal for the former Kmart site. REA, as I'll call real estate affiliates, has two major anchor stores that have a combined would use up about 72,000 of the 84,000 square feet of the building. And a possible third tenant would use up another 10,000 square feet. During the past several months, staff has been in discussions with Mr. Gottlieb on a redevelopment agreement using money from the Meadows Tax Increment Financing District. And REA has already gutted the interior of the building as well. They plan to spend $6.6 million on construction costs plus an additional $600,000 in financial costs. As part of the redevelopment agreement, when the anchor store, I'll call it anchor store number 1, occupies their space, the city would give REA $25,000 of TIF increments generated by the Meadows TIF or any adjacent TIF district. The reason we're looking at giving them a payment at that time is we're trying to keep the taxes lower for them so that the finances will work for the developer. Likewise, when anchor store number 2 occupies their space, we'll give them an additional $25,000 in TIF funds to the developer. When the third store opens, no advance payments will be made. That was because they're not a major anchor. And once increments generated from the development start to occur, the city will reimburse the developer 70% of the funds that are generated up to a cumulative total not to exceed $950,000. This agreement does give the developer the right to object to his property assessment, and they acknowledge that they may not receive any increments if the assessment falls below the baseline. Currently, the property is assessed at $251,191. The current plan is to have both anchor stores, which are retail stores and will generate sales tax for us, open by April of 2021. And staff's request that council move this redevelopment agreement forward and place it on the August 17th agenda.
Thank you, Manager Bucus. Discussion, council?
Sure.
Alderman McLaughlin.
Thank you. What was the thought process on this one of not putting a prohibition on the objecting to property assessment?
The developer felt that one of the major tenants may want to object, some not now, but maybe in the future, because they're a triple lease requirements. And so that's why we put in there that if you do object, there's a possibility you won't get any increment. And he acknowledges that in the agreement that he may not get any increment until it gets back up to where, the assessment.
Follow-up?
Yes, Alderman Smith.
I don't recall seeing it, but was there a cutoff date as to, so, for instance, this isn't something where they can come back, I'll just use an absurd number, like, 30 years down the road and say, well, I only got reimbursed 600,000 of my 950 after they, objected to it. Is there a cutoff in regards to that?
Yes, they have until life of the TIF.
There you go.
And there's about 18 years left on this TIF.
Perfect. So other than that, and we can use contiguous TIF funds on this, correct? If we need to?
Yes.
Okay. So on this one, when, as written, when anchor store number 1 occupies, it triggers a $25,000 commitment. When anchor store 2 occupies, it triggers a $25,000 commitment. And those are the only 2 ironclad commitments. For instance, if they come on in and they don't, even though they're talking about putting in over $6.5 million in regards to construction costs on it, for whatever reason, if it doesn't spin off increments on here, those other contingent costs of upwards of $950,000 don't come into play. Is that all accurate?
That's correct.
But obviously, realistically, the way this should work is you got over $7 million worth of investments, a $50,000 commitment once we have those 2 stores in, and then if it's working as anticipated, it'll be spinning off increments. They get 70% of that increments on there up until the maximum reimbursable cost of the $950,000. And there's one other factor at play that I recall reading, but if both anchor tenants are gone, that also stops our obligation on increment, correct?
That is correct. If one of the anchors leaves, they will have a reduction in their increment. If both of them leave, they will not receive any increment until such time as their stores are full again.
Well, if that's, in that light, this seems squarely within the realm of what these tools are supposed to be used for, leverage some of leverage this to generate additional increment, generate additional employment, generate additional sales tax. So I appreciate you bringing this forward.
Chair.
Thank you. Alderman Borneman.
In the memo, and you said that there's the agreement is the city will reimburse the developer 70% of the funds that are generated. Is that all funds, or is it strictly sales tax or property tax?
No, it's property tax that the property generates. It's not all funds from the TIF district. It's only 70% from the property taxes that's generated. The increment of property taxes that's generated.
Thank you.
Chair?
Yes, Alderman Berman.
Manager Bucus, is there any obligation on the part of either the anchor stores to stay in business for so long? And I guess that's not the right way to put it, but if they go out of business in a year or 2 and they get another COVID coming through, retail shut down, what's their obligation with the funds that we have given them from the TIF?
Well, we're giving the funds to the developer.
The developer.
Right. And so if something should happen that stores close down again or they go bankrupt, we would be out that money that we gave them.
Okay.
That we gave to the developer. There again, if they're in business for a year, do we make up enough money with that $25,000 or $50,000? We'll have to see at that time. So that's a risk we're taking, but the developer's taking a bigger risk because he's investing $6.5 million.
Correct.
And he may or may not get some of that money back from us.
Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Manager Bucus, for bringing this forward. It does sound like a very reasonable request to a very good use of the TIF funding to pursue this. So The request, as I see on the memo, is to move forward with this on the August 17th agenda. Do we have a motion?
So move.
Okay, we have a motion by Alderman Busker, seconded by Alderman Parker. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And on to item number 13. We have a discussion regarding chronic nuisance ordinance, presented by Attorney Steve Cox. Attorney Cox.
With the chair's permission, I'd like to step up to the podium.
Yes, by all means. Sure.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think everybody has had a chance to, you should have gotten 2 copies of this ordinance. One was a red line, which was essentially unintelligible, but that's the way the ordinance version will look. And then there was a clean version that was sent out that hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at. The reason you're seeing this tonight is we all know the problems with nuisance properties. You can have one property in a neighborhood which just, it reduces quality of life and property values for 20 houses surrounding it. So over the last few years, the city has really stepped up enforcement of these code violations, and that's been done through assessment of fines, through the implementation of our administrative adjudicative process, the adoption of the iWork software, and in any number of other measures which have worked in large measure. What we're finding now, a few years into this, is we're still running into properties that are chronic nuisances. They're constantly on the dockets. We're getting no relief from them. We're fining them, and they're doing nothing. So, took a look at the existing chronic nuisance ordinance that we have, and why we have this. Why aren't we implementing it? Well, the reason that it wasn't being implemented is that in many cases, in terms of simple code enforcement, just the timing didn't allow us to utilize it. By the time you have the required number of violations in our code enforcement system, you are outside the window that you can have something declared a chronic nuisance. So this falls back on violations of other criminal provisions, that sort of thing, and required the police department to initiate all of these activities. It was outside of code enforcement, so it was utilizing the police department and the courts. Well, if you're a municipality or a village that doesn't have an administrative adjudicative process, well, that's your only recourse, so of course you have to do that. But what we were not doing is utilizing the fact that we have a code enforcement department. We have an administrative adjudicative process that affords due process to alleged offenders. So why not bring that all in and leverage what we've already got? And that's what this ordinance hopefully does. So the prior ordinance, or the existing ordinance that we have, has effectively one remedy, and that's if you have 3 violations within 90 days, we can make your house, we can declare your house unlivable. We can placard your house and say nobody can live there for 30 to 180 days. Well, as you can imagine, that's fairly impactful if you're a landlord. So basically what you're saying is if you're a landlord and you have a tenant in there, you can no longer derive revenues from this property. Well, the problem is that becomes a little bit difficult to implement as to owner-occupied properties. Requiring us, really, our only remedy is to tell someone, well, you've screwed up a couple times, you can't live in your house anymore. Well, that's tough to implement. So what you have in front of you, again, is drafted in light of trying to remedy those shortcomings that we've identified. The first thing it does is it expands our window of violations, increases it from 90 days to 6 months. Now, currently, as I said, under the code enforcement, it's very difficult to get something under there. That's because under our old system, we had 30-day gaps between our hearings. So by the time you would file something, notify them, get them to hearing, and then if they asked for a continuance, they got one. You're looking at up to 75 days for one violation. Well, you can't get 3 violations in 90 days, so it basically just means you can't use that ordinance. Now, we've halved the time between administrative hearings. So it's 2 weeks now between our administrative hearings. We're doing those more frequently, and doubled the amount of time, doubled the window. So this will bring in more of those code enforcement type of things. Now, in terms of remedies, what happens is we use the stick with the 3 strikes, you're out. I've mentioned a couple times, Abner Doubleday decided, 150 years ago that was a good system. It's used throughout the legal system, so let's keep using that. In a nutshell, after your second violation, no, I shouldn't say that. After the second or more violations, when you're on the radar at code enforcement, in other words, we're having a problem with you. At that point, the community development director can send out a notice to the owner and say, hey, you're on the bubble here. If you get one more, we're going to declare you a chronic nuisance. That notice goes out. And again, it goes out from community development, doesn't have to go through PD. Now, if PD wants something done, of course, they can bring that to code enforcement, but it originates with community development. If another one occurs again, now we get into a serious notice, and community development sends you, the owner and the tenant, if applicable, a notice. It goes to a hearing. The administrative adjudicative hearing officer affords the defendant to defend themselves, or the opportunity to defend themselves. But ultimately, under this ordinance, if the hearing officer finds that the property is a chronic nuisance per the definition, there are certain remedies which kick in. And that's what really the meat of this is. So it gives us some tools. As of the date of the finding, you're accruing fines at $100 a day. We don't have to keep going out and issuing recurring fines. This is not going to be used on somebody that forgot to cut their grass a couple times. This is, you haven't cut your grass all summer, we've sent you 100 notices, you've never shown up, you've never applied, we need some recourse here. It allows code enforcement or streets to go out, or public works, to go out to the property, and if you've got a bunch of garbage, we can get it out of there. We don't have to go to court, we don't have to declare an emergency, we can go in, we can clean up the yard. Can't go in the house, the remedy's limited to outdoor areas, but we can go out and we can clean the place up so it's not a blight on the neighborhood. Currently, we have to go to court to do that. Also allows a declaration, if it's requested, that the house, that a residential structure constitutes a dangerous and unsafe structure. That is an independent finding through due process, which gives us a little bit more leverage if we have to go through the demolition process. We've got, the building inspector already has that determination through a hearing that the property is dangerous and unsafe, and that's going to have a lot of clout if we have to go across the street and go to the courthouse. So that's not a remedy in and of itself, but it's effective. And then leaving the same remedy that we have now as to tenant-occupied properties. If a tenant is occupying the property and not the owner, we have the ability to say that that property can no longer be used for a period of 30 to 180 days, which is the remedy we have now. And clearly, the way that a landlord would remedy that problem is to evict the tenant who's causing these issues, if it's a use-based problem. If it's condition-based, then the landlord needs to correct that property, or their ability to earn money from that property is taken away for a time until it's corrected. And of course, with any of these things, if they remedy the problem which is causing this, that's a defense. So if you fix the problem, you can make this go away. Again, this isn't intended to just be a gotcha. The situations in which I can foresee applying these are the worst. These are the worst of the worst. We can't get any kind of remedy, and we need to get control of this property one way or the other. And this hopefully gives us the tool to do that.
Thank you, Attorney Cox. I had just a couple of questions in reviewing this. So on the definitions, chronic nuisance property, it appears much of this is some activities taking place on the property, and I can understand in the case of this being a rental property where there, things such as disorderly conduct, public indecency, criminal damage, and so forth. If these things are taking place and the landlord evicts the tenant, does that start back to zero if the tenant was causing those conditions as the nuisance property?
Practically speaking, yes. Again, the remedying the condition is an affirmative defense here. So I think that if you go to the hearing officer and say, well, the condition was the tenant, again, disorderly conduct, unlawful use of weapons, so there's a number of arrests at the property. And hopefully, the landlord has in their lease the crime-free housing addendum, which we require them to have, and most do. And I know the Freeport Area Landlords Association has that provision built into their lease as well. So the landlord, hopefully, when getting a very stern notice under this, is going to understand, look, I need to remove that tenant. And that again, takes this off of the radar. Now, technically, once you've had 3 violations, if you would have another one, it doesn't necessarily automatically just reset. So you would be, as a defendant, you would state, I remedied the conditions, and that would be the defense to the finding of the chronic nuisance. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, and I think that the fact that it's coming forward in the hearing, that this is the response to this being labeled as a chronic nuisance property, that there is an opportunity for that case to be presented.
And that's actually built into the ordinance as a defense. It's really the only defense to this type of action. And I would just mention, the things that you pointed out there's 2 types of violations. There's use-based, and then there's condition-based, I call it. So, the use-based typically is going to be a tenant. The condition-based could be either. Most of our owner-occupied are going to go more towards the condition-based.
Sure. So in terms of following up, this is now being moved from police or public works to the community development side of things. Is that a standard that's used in other communities? What's the reasoning behind that?
The idea there is to funnel everything through community development, because that's where code enforcement sits. So the idea would be that if PD, certainly, if they're having problems with a location, they can bring that to the attention of code enforcement. We're going to have some discussions between the departments as to how to implement this, because we have multiple directions this can come from. It can come from public works. As you see, the definition was expanded into the utility section. We've had some issues with that as well. So just sweeping all of that in, the departments are going to need to know, look, we need to take this to code enforcement and let them initiate these proceedings. So centralizing everything in-house and then proceeding from a single point. I think before it was PD and Public Works. I think that was the two avenues, and then they basically went to the court, which I think that's a step that we hopefully don't need to take. We still can, but hopefully don't need to.
Sure. So it sounds like it's a process improvement, keeping it close to the responsibilities for following up on those code violations. Right?
Yes. The idea here is we have a chronic nuisance ordinance that in my experience, I think we've used once or twice, because it's just so cumbersome to implement. So what's the point if you've got it and you don't use it? So again, using the tools and the mechanisms we already have in place, I think that this greatly streamlines that process and hopefully makes it a toolbox that we're not afraid to reach into.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Alderman Brashaw first.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have much to say about this as far as having any problems with it. And speaking as a landlord in Freeport, I'm in my 23rd year. We get very few calls for problems or nuisances on our properties. So I just don't want you to think this is a selfish opinion or anything. I just had a couple of questions. I think it's well written, but I'm not sure I quite understand under definitions, under Section 8, item number 17, the violation of any provisions of Chapter 1040 utilities generally. Can you explain to me, like under the water, give me an example of how this would apply? Because if, say, if it was a tenant, what were they doing wrong considering the utilities?
The utility-related, very good question. And the prior ordinance did not address this particular section, any of the utilities. This actually was added after discussions with code enforcement, after the initial draft. So where this can come up is we've run into trouble with people with sewer issues, things like that aren't corrected, you know, your private portion of the line. So if, or tampering with meters, or, you know, anything where we've got, run into residential properties where the meter either wasn't working or was serving multiple properties. So things like that the streets department or public works would identify that a condition exists. Those can be addressed too if they're recurring.
I'll follow up.
Yes, Alderman Brascia.
So, for example, if a tenant did something illegal, like unhook the water service to, say, fill an illegal swimming pool, are you saying this would go back on the landlord who had no knowledge of it? Doesn't seem legal.
So in that circumstance, that would be, you get a ticket for that, right? The tenant would get a ticket for that, or the property would get a ticket for it, and they'd have to figure that out. Now, if that happens multiple times, that's the only time that this ordinance itself would ever come into play. This is for a property where we just have violation after violation after violation in a period of time. So if somebody did something one year and then somebody did something another year, that's not going to be an issue either. This is 3 times in 6 months, you know, where we've had a problem. So understandably, with tenants, you can have any number of problems. And
Exactly.
odds are, even if you've had a couple, that's not going to be what I call on the radar. What we're talking about with these ordinance, these types of violations are the types of things that are in the administrative hearings time after time after time, and nobody's responding, nobody's addressing the issues. And I would also say, even if this was used, say that came up and it was used, as a landlord, you can say, look, I addressed this problem. Here are the steps that I took. And that's a defense to the action. The properties that we're running into that are chronic nuisances, nobody's taking any steps at all to remedy these.
I see. One more follow-up.
Yes, Alderman Brascia.
Thank you. So sorry, there's a fly around here. If the tenant, per se, had an issue with water, or say their sewer was backing up, obviously that's not necessarily their fault anyhow. That would be the landlord situation. And some of these other items had occurred also. There's quite a list here. For the listening public, it includes disorderly conduct, unlawful use of weapons, mob action, discharge of a firearm, gambling, as defined in ILCS. There's a definition there. Possession, manufacture, or delivery of controlled substance. Another one is assault or battery. Another one is sexual abuse or related offenses. Another one is public indecency, prostitution, criminal damage. There's a whole bunch of items in here that obviously, if the landlord rented to this person, it sounds like if they had a number of these, they'd be not a great person to live in that neighborhood anyhow, and the landlord should rethink their situation and probably do an immediate eviction or ask for one from a judge. So, I mean, looking through that, I don't see any problem so much with those as long as I understand some of the definitions as you explained. I did have one other question. Could I?
Yes, Alderman Brashaw.
Thank you. Right after the item number 17, you have item number 18, violation of any provision regarding garbage and rubbish collection and disposal. Can you also give me an example of that?
I just lost my A+ on the quiz, I think. What garbage and rubbish collection would be is if you have, I'll give you an example. What would fall under that is if you have garbage that's not in a receptacle. In fact, I know that because we just had an administrative adjudication on exactly that case. So if you have garbage laying around the yard, that's what would trigger a violation for that. So obviously, as you can imagine, if you have a property in your neighborhood where there's garbage laying around the yard that's not in receptacles, and they're cited for that multiple times and not doing anything about it, that's where this comes into play. So, so that is a direct example of where that would come about. There are probably some other violations within 1060, but that's generally the type of thing we're dealing with there.
Thank you. And if say the nuisance violation, say there was one time that the nuisance inspector went there and wrote up 3 separate tickets for 3 separate items on this list, is that considered 3 times in the 6 months, or is that considered 1 time in the 6 months? Because if the landlord or property owner stepped in and remediated that situation, is that considered the 1 strike?
It is, and that's a great question. And I actually left the language in there from the prior one because I think it makes sense. And it's separate factual occurrences. So in other words, it's multiple citations over different time periods. So if you've got a bunch of violations, code enforcement comes out to these houses, and if there's a house that's really a mess and hasn't been taken care of, you can have 5, 6, 7 violations that are written under the code. Well, if all those are remediated, that's a single act. So that you're going to have separate dates for those to be separate factual occurrences.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alderman Ross, you have.
Yes. The question is, if the owner of the property and/or the landlord, if he moves all the tenants, this has already happened, but if he moves all the tenants' belongings out to the curb and leaves them, he gets a ordinance violation, correct? And then within that, 7 days, 5 to 7 days, he doesn't answer or doesn't clean up what he put out there, it's $100 a day after that.
No,
Okay.
no, that wouldn't trigger it. It's a great example to go through, because if somebody puts somebody out and they just put all the stuff at the curb and nobody takes it and it's just left there, now you'd have a violation. Again, maybe garbage and rubbish, maybe you'd have just something else, but it's junk in the yard, so you get a ticket, right? That's one occurrence.
Okay.
So that's got to happen 2 more times before there's a hearing on whether or not it's a chronic nuisance. So it takes a lot to get there. So the landlord in your circumstance, Alderman, gets a ticket. So he gets a ticket for the ordinance violation, just like normal. This is kind of an overlay to all those. So if you're getting a bunch of those tickets, you're doing a bunch of things that are getting you fined, now there's a finding. And after that hearing, now you're getting $100 a day. So it's kind of the last resort type of remedy that we're talking about with these chronic nuisances.
Okay. Follow-up, Chair.
Yes, Alderman Ross.
So until then, he gets his tickets, has his hearing. In other words, the garbage furniture just stays there in the site.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would happen is he gets a ticket. He goes to the administrative adjudication, which now is 2 weeks, not 30 days out. Either if he hasn't fixed it by then, he probably gets a finding at that point. Now, the next day he gets another ticket because he hasn't fixed that problem. It's already been adjudicated, and it just keeps moving forward like that. So again, it's not. This is not a first tier application. So the idea is you have to have multiple violations before we thump you with this, because as you can imagine, $100 a day, that piles up really fast. And it's on the landlord then, or the owner, to come back and tell us, I fixed the problem, now please stop fining me.
Maybe you'll clean it up a little faster.
Well, yeah, the implementation of this, is it's originally, or as it's currently drafted, it really is a last resort remedy.
All right.
Because again, right now, our remedy is to take away the right to occupy the property. That's it, which is, as you can imagine, is a very extreme sort of remedy. So this is, we're making it easier, but not easy to use it, because it's still a fairly extreme, severe remedy. Extreme is probably the wrong word. Severe remedy, and that is, again, $100 a day automatically. So you're piling those up. And by the way, you could go up to $750 a day. That's what the statute allows. In fact, that's true for any ordinance violation. I would strongly discourage that, because that's the sort of thing where they take it from severe to extreme, and a court could potentially shoot that down.
Okay, now, not to cut you off, but
That's
the last resort, shall we say, and that's after what, 3 warnings?
Yep, you're on your third strike and you had a hearing.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, after the 3rd strike, if he's not done anything with it, he gets the ultimate.
At that point, yeah. At that point, we can go onto the property. We can go in and we can clean the place up. We can mow it. We can clean up the trash. We can get rid of the weeds. We can knock down the shed out back that's fallen over.
Get rid of cars and.
Get rid of the cars. So it gets us on the property. And then from there, you're getting $100 a day until you fix whatever else is wrong.
Okay, thank you, sir.
You can go if you want.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Chair.
Yes, Alderman McClatchy.
All right, thanks for bringing this. It is a demonstrable fact that if you look back over the last 3 years at the administrative level, the amount of tickets that the department has issued, I mean, is more than doubled in regards to that. So there's been a significant uptick in regards to identifying problems. But as we've seen, and we've all talked about this, I know Mayor Miller's mentioned it, Alderman Borneman, Director Buchan, we all had different conversations on it. And you even saw it brought up in the social justice listening session multiple times. Okay, we've got things that are ticketed, and we got people that are being fined, but we've got certain problems that just are problem properties that we're not getting any resolution on. So I appreciate you bringing this as a tool as to how can we use those. And I'll note, just for the record, this isn't a landlord, only a landlord issue only, or an owner occupied issue only. I mean, some of our nastiest properties that we're dealing with right now, I think, are owner occupied too, and we also have got a lot of landlord issue those too. So we need a tool that can address both of them, and I think this does that. But walk me through a scenario here then, because obviously, yeah, somebody doesn't mow their lawn, somebody gets, somebody's got, a shed falling down, somebody's got that, you're going to start off and you're going to ticket them, and that's fine. But walk me through a scenario, and then also a fastest available timeline for a property that we've said, okay, we've gone the regular route multiple times, this hasn't been remedied, we're still seeing other issues, and you may, in a lot of these properties, you're also seeing, some criminal activity too as well. So we got one that we say, okay, we're going to use this tool on. What is the timeline that we can expect to either see? I mean, obviously, anytime they can comply, but let's say they're not complying. What is our timeline for a given scenario once we've targeted a property?
It's a good question, and as you identified, it depends on if it's coming from multiple directions. So if you've got something that's going through the criminal system, you've got something going through the ordinance violation system, and you've got something going through the administrative adjudication, they could all run coterminously, so you could have a horizon, 30, 45 days. more likely, you're gonna see something that's running through the admin process. And we're gonna say turnaround on those, if you get a continuance, is probably 30 days apiece. I think that would be a conservative estimate. So you would have violations, 3 violations, so you'd go 90 days before you got written on this. After you got written on this, then you'd have another 14 to 30 days, depending on where it fell, where you're notified and given an opportunity for hearing. So again, this is 90 to 100 days.
Follow-up, Chair.
Yes, Alderman
All right.
Platha.
And again, I want to reiterate, this isn't for the one-off properties. A one-off property, someone gets a warning, they don't comply within a period of time, they get a ticket, and then they have an administrative hearing now within 2 weeks, right?
Right.
Okay, but for a problem property that's just not complying and the normal tools aren't working, you're talking a little over, you said a 90-day process there?
And that could be accelerated. I'm using the standard period where the hearing officer will just generally grant a continuance. If somebody shows up and says, look, I'm working on the problem, you get a continuance, and that's probably as it should be, right? But if somebody's a frequent flyer and we know that they just have no intention to fix, then we could argue at the admin level that they don't deserve a continuance and potentially shorten that time period. So, but I think, using that 90-day horizon is, and remember, this is our accelerated system.
Sure.
So 90 days used to cut us off. But now 90 days, it's a long time. But it's better than never, which is really what we're implementing now.
Follow-up, Chair.
Yes, Alderman.
All right, so we've got a property that's been identified, been tagged, and has gone through this process. If it's a landlord-owned property, the landlord at any time can try to address it by, if it's a tenant issue, removing the tenant through the procedures that they have. And if that's the case and that mitigates the issue, fine, we've got success. If it's a situation where it's a landlord-owned property or just an owner-occupied property and we're not getting, it's a landlord issue, not a tenant issue, but it's a landlord issue or an owner-occupied issue. In that scenario, we've got somebody into the system, they've had their hearing, and they're still not compliance after that period of time. You start hitting with the $100 fines a day. What is your action item once those fines continue to accumulate if we're not seeing compliance?
Good question. So the idea is throughout, the ultimate goal of code enforcement is to get compliance.
Right.
Right? So the initial idea of the $100 a day is, well, it's twofold. One, so that we don't have to keep going through the administrative process on the same violation over and over and over again. And two, to start accelerating the accumulation of those fines, to make somebody act or not. If they're serious about trying to preserve their property, they're going to act. They're going to repair they're going to remedy the problems that exist there. If they don't, at some point the amounts of the fines are going to exceed the value of the property. At which point the city would initiate an action to foreclose the liens which have accumulated. Because remember, all these fines and associated remediation costs are all liens against the property. So we lien the property, we foreclose it, and then ultimately take control of the property that way. That's the worst outcome that we could look at. But again, it allows ultimately the community to get control back of that property, which has become a blight.
Follow, Chair.
Yes.
All right, so under this scenario, we have a progression of initial compliance, hopefully, warning, initial compliance, ticket, hoping for compliance, this administrative process, this chronic nuisance process, hoping for compliance, accumulation of additional fines, hoping for compliance, and then by compliance, that could also mean, landlord resolving it if it's a tenant issue, and ultimately, our backstop, if through all those levels there's no compliance, is you can foreclose on the lien at that point. So ultimately, and then obviously if you foreclose on it, then we're looking for compliance, and we can handle it on that end. So under each stage of these process, we have a pathway towards compliance. The only thing I guess I would say, the only admonition I'd have on this is a tool is only as good as it's used. So we obviously have properties that are identified that I'm sure we could implement this to. And that's the only thing I ask is if we do give this tool, or I should say restructured tool, even if you will, that we make use of it in the appropriate circumstances.
Chair.
Yes.
I-
Alderman.
I'm kind of getting, I didn't mean for this to be a pun, but I'm getting in the weeds here a little bit. 659.05, the procedure section. A3, it says a concise list of remedies should the property be declared a public nuisance. That should be chronic nuisance, right?
Yeah, that should be.
Other than that, Mr. McClanathan summed it up well. It's important to remember that this isn't an automatic process too, that it is, even homes that do qualify for this it may not be used against them. It's meant to target properties that have been, well, chronically poor in compliance. So I think like I said, it's not punitive in nature. Its goal is to maintain compliance. It allows for a defense to be, I fixed the problem and you can avoid this whole process. It provides people notice ahead of time, whereas, they get a notice saying, if there's another violation, this procedure starts and here's what all can happen. So I think this is well written and it is something that we've needed, and I thank you for that, and I'll make a motion to move this forward to the next council meeting.
Second that.
I got one more question.
Okay, so I heard a motion by Alderman Borneman. We'll say the second by Alderman McClanathan on that. And further discussion, Alderman Ross?
Yes, sir. Okay, I ran into this one too, though. Tree falls in the tenant's backyard. Tenant tells the landlord, hey, tree fell. Landlord's still not doing anything about it. So the neighbor starts complaining about the tree. So what happens from there?
Well, at that point, there's a ticket issued, and then it depends on what happens from there. So if a ticket gets issued and the problem gets resolved, we're done.
Done.
But if a ticket gets issued, nobody shows up, nobody does anything about it, then another ticket gets issued.
All right.
We go through and we get to the hearing, nobody does anything about it. Now you get a warning under the chronic nuisance, and then you get written again. And once the third time you get written, at that point you get a notice from community development that they're going to move forward and declare the property a chronic nuisance because there's a continuing problem on the property. At that point, at any point during that time period, and remember we're talking 60, 90 days
Right.
at this point, anytime during that process, that tree can get out of there and you're done. You still get your fines, but this never gets invoked.
Okay.
So, and again, the notices that you're getting are asking you to come talk to code enforcement. Come down to City Hall, talk to us, figure out how we're gonna solve this. So after all that happens, and if you're finally found a chronic nuisance, two things happen. One, Public Works can go on your property and take the tree out. Well, at that point, we just complied for you, right? So your fines probably stop at that point, but we're still leaning you for the work that we did on the property. Problem solved. That's how that scenario would play out, start to finish, as I see it. Where it's something that we can't fix, like a structural issue to a house or a conduct-based issue, that's where you're going to keep getting the fines. But where we can go in and mitigate the issue, we'll just do that. We'll put a lien on the property, and then problem solved. And as far as I'm concerned, under this, mission accomplished.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just one other point of discussion before we move. I know we have a motion on the floor here as well. Manager Bucus, a question for you on this. Given that this crosses over a couple of lines and departments under your supervision, do you have any thoughts on how to have a database or anything to keep track of the different occurrences on a certain property?
We'll be using our iWorks to keep track of all the violations and that.
Okay. So the code violations would be captured that way. Now, if we have other activities taking place that may be criminal in nature, the disorderly conduct, use of weapons and so forth, so all of that coming together, I don't know if there was a thought on how to manage that data.
Well, I think basically we have our staff meetings and plus Steve's involved.
Mhm.
And he has a bi-weekly meeting with code enforcement on the violations that are coming up. So we do keep track, not only through iWorks, but if we need to, we can always put up some kind of spreadsheet. But I think we have enough communication within our staff that we know what's going on.
And if I can just tag on to that.
Yeah, please.
We had that discussion regarding, we've got our ordinance violation, so it comes through PD and they write an ordinance violation ticket. That goes through the courthouse. So that gets prosecuted over there. There's an entry of a judgment. If it's just a code enforcement issue, then that goes through our administrative adjudication process. If you've got the PD involved, now it went through the state's attorney's office. So we talked about how do we capture all that. The answer is there's no easy way to do that. And to try to do that would create a significant administrative burden to try to. So I think the mentality here is this is not a net designed to catch every occurrence. This is designed to be a tool to be used for those properties that we just are constantly on the radar and constantly coming across on reports. So again, it's not going to catch everything, and I don't think it's really intended to. I think that trying to catch all of them, the PD, code enforcement, they know where they've got a problem, and they'll put their heads together and say, okay, we're having problems here, we're having problems here. Let's proceed with the chronic nuisance. And again, this isn't there's not 100 of these that are brought a year. There's 5 to 10 probably.
Okay. That helps to have context of how many of these you're seeing as well. Okay, thank you. Any further discussion, council? Okay. We did have a motion on the floor to move this forward to the next council meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Appreciate your work on this, Attorney Cox. So moving on to item 14, discussion of children at play sign policy. Manager Bucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At our last city council meeting, we had discussions on installation of a autistic child sign. And the city occasionally receives requests for installation of slow children at play signs, and usually the residents that are asking for these installations feel that it's because they believe the motorists are driving in excess speeds and or many children are playing in their neighborhood. Currently, it's the city policy not to install slow children at play signs. At our August 3rd meeting, as I stated, the city council requested that there was a request made that an autistic child sign be placed, and the city's current unwritten policy is not to allow, as I said, any of these signs or any similar signs. And we were asked to kind of explore that. Staff was asked to explore the request and develop a written policy for council to consider. There's actually 2 alternatives that we could look at. The first alternative would be to deny any slow children at play sign, autistic child, blind child, deaf child, and handicapped child, or any similar signs. The second alternative would be to not allow any children at play signs, but allow autistic child, blind child, deaf child, and handicapped child signs if certain criteria are met. Included in your packet were these 2 alternatives that I developed. It's my recommendation, I'm not going to say it's staff's recommendation, but it's my recommendation that the city council adopt alternative number 1 and prohibit all signs together. My original memorandum stated that I was looking at prohibiting children at play signs, but allowing other signage. But after looking at, thinking about this weekend and looking at the various areas of town and some comments that were made at the last council meeting, I feel that we'll have more signs up than we need. They don't meet the criteria of alerting drivers that there's an issue coming about because everybody's just going to take them for granted. So it's my recommendation that we keep the current unwritten policy that we have and not allow any signs whatsoever.
Chair?
Thank you, Manager Bucus. Alderman McClathen.
Thank you. Manager Bucus, the administration was reviewing this issue. What research did they come across regarding the efficacy of such signs?
Basically, most communities just do not allow them.
I thought I saw something when you were looking in regards to one of the reports showing that with the studies in regards to this, there wasn't any statistical benefit in regards to curbing the desired behavior from the drivers. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's the Wisconsin study that did that, yes.
Chair.
That they just weren't effective.
Chair.
Yes, Alderman Boardman.
This is a really actually interesting read that you provided us with the studies, and so it's correct that the Illinois Department of Transportation does not have any officially approved children at play signs.
That's correct.
And there was an issue you mentioned in the memo about the issue with us putting up a non-approved, officially putting up a non-approved sign. Can you elaborate on that if you know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about liability on our part? Or?
Yeah, you mentioned there's a concern that if we go against the Illinois Department of Transportation's recommendations for approved things, you had a concern.
Well, it's not in compliance with the manual on uniform traffic control devices. And so, there's been documentation saying that, Illinois has adopted that standard. And, we're supposed to be following those standards. My concern is, I guess on this is that if we put a sign up, does that mean that the parent can let the child run wild outside without any supervision because we put a sign up to warn motorists that we have children at play or we have a child that's deaf? That's another thing too is if a child's deaf, they won't hear the horn beep. And if a child's blind, he won't see the car coming. So, those are issues that, we can't regulate, we can't regulate what's going to happen out there. A motorist will either be attentive and watching what's happening around him or he won't be. Just like a child will be playing in their yard and a ball goes out in the street and may run out in the street without looking. There's nothing we can do about that. No sign's going to stop a motorist from saying, okay, where's that child at? How far down is because the sign just says there's a child here. Does it say anything else? There's no safety to it. There's no, I don't know. There's
Follow-up.
Yes, Alderman Boardman.
Like I said, it was really informative information from the study because when this first came to the floor last council meeting, obviously my heart was in, I felt like this was the right thing to do, but then you present these studies which are relied on in this field, and the studies show that it doesn't provide the safety benefit that one would think that would accompany that sign. And you listed a lot of reasons. The studies show the signs are generally ignored by motorists after they're seen for the first time. They do not reduce the speed of traffic or make motorists more observant. The signs may give false sense of security in letting children play in or near the streets, which I don't give much weight to that but moving on, there's no legal meaning and carry no enforcement value. So what would be the violation for someone to not go slow? What is slow? That's nothing the city could enforce. They don't provide any guidance to the motorist other than for them to be alert. But again, there's kind of this finding that the more signs are up, there's a likelihood that motorists will become to disregard not just that sign, but other signs if they don't I don't know, I'm getting carried away, but I'm going over the reasons cited in those studies for not installing a sign, because at the end of the day, you would think this would be a common sense, yeah, we should do this, this seems right, but I don't see, the studies kind of show that it doesn't really provide the benefit that you would think it would have. So I'm not really making a decision one way or the other, but I think it's important to present the reasons why one would be against these signs, because it seems kind of like a cruel thing to vote against. So I think it's important to point that out, that there are actually data out there that shows these don't provide a benefit. So that's all I have.
Chair.
Yes, Alderman Ross.
Yes, there was a constituent in my ward that first approached me in reference to the autistic sign. And I do know it's a very, very touchy topic. True enough. But I do agree with Alderman Borman by saying, I thought about the Illinois Department of Transportation also. Now, Manager Bucas, what is putting a sign up? Are they stating that? Well, who would be liable? That's what I'm saying. If something was happening, or did we come across that?
Well, that's the question. Is the city liable because they put up a sign saying that there's children at play, or
Anything?
anything? Right.
Yeah, that's it. Correct.
Are we now giving children the right to play in the street by putting up that sign?
Yeah. It's man. Yeah, it's
It's tough.
Yeah, it's a very tough one. I'm gonna be totally honest with you.
And it was my heart that I went with alternative number 2 to allow, not the children at play signs, but the other signs. But then the more I looked at it, the more I thought about it over the weekend, I said, every place I worked, we did not allow any type of signs up. And what that happens too then is, once you put them up, when do they come down? Who's going to notify us that the child that you were concerned about is no longer living there?
Correct. And how should I say this? Yeah, it's just a touchy situation. Okay, better yet, do we know of any other community that has these type of signs in their community?
The alternative number 2, I borrowed their form on the back, their application, I believe was from Carroll Stream.
And they're the only one community.
They're the only one I'm aware of that allows some type of signage.
Okay. Yeah, this one is yeah. Yeah, this one is it just got me at I mean, I'll be honest with you. I was asked about it, and I know I don't have the answer. I mean, I hate to say, I'll just say it. I don't have the answer, but I guess you don't know until you have a child like that. I'll be totally honest with you. You just don't. So I'll leave it at that.
Sure, and Alderman Ross, I don't see any lack of compassion in any of this discussion for any of those who, families who are dealing with situations, and it really is a matter of the safety, providing the safety for that. And I think the point from the studies and what Manager Bucas was saying is about this, that the studies are showing that it's actually has potential for a detrimental effect because of people thinking, okay, there's not a sign posted in other areas, so now I can blast through here without consequence, right? Or, things to that nature, or are people truly paying attention to that sign? Now, so I understand the direction this discussion has gone. So what I'm hearing from Manager Bucas as a mode to go forward would be to table this indefinitely, is what was basically, that would be that exercising that option to not proceed with a change to our ordinance.
Well, currently, we don't have any written policy on this, and
Okay.
I think that's why I gave you two alternatives, one basically
Okay.
banning everything, and one giving you an alternative that if you're going to do something, here's something to consider. So I think eventually we have to do something, because for us is to say it's under
Okay.
policy, people are going to ask us, and we're going to keep getting requests. This way we have a policy one way or another.
Okay, yeah, I apologize, misunderstanding on that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Alderman Brashaw.
Thank you. Alderman Ross, you had a good point. It is a touchy-feely subject, and we don't want to feel like we're bad people because we vote for having no signs put up. But speaking as a parent who raised a handicapped child, I would go along with Manager Bucas's recommendation to adopt the first alternative, which would deny the signs based on the statistics that show that they have not helped other communities, and cars do not slow down necessarily because they see that sign. This is in no way, shape, or form saying that I don't have heart for the people that want safety for their children. We all want safety for our children, whether they have a learning disability, or whether they're autistic, whether they have Down syndrome, as my son did. It's one of those things where we have to do what's best for the public, and best for everybody. And there again, if we're going to put the signs up and pay those funds and have everybody ignore them and possibly actually hurt that child, the parents thinking the child's safe and let them play in the front yard and they run out in the street, those cars may not slow down because of those signs. So I do agree with Manager Bucas's recommendation.
Yes, Chair, I totally agree with you,
Alderman Ross.
Alderman Bradshaw. I mean, where I'm coming from is that at one time I was handicapped my own self, and I was asked, and I was asked by the constituent in the area, and I was like, I said, I will do everything I can to try to help you in any way I can. We put the speed wagon out there, and they stated they didn't slow the traffic down. And I said, well, okay, I'll go to bat for you for the sign, but it's, it's, wow, it's just one of those deals where being an alderman is just not an easy job sometimes. So you got to do, but with the studies, I can work with that, and go from there, because I know there's compassion all around this room, because it can happen to anyone anytime, and I guess we'll have to move on from there.
Sure.
Yes, Alderman McClathan.
I appreciate all the comments in regards to this, and I look at this and I say, well, what was the underlying result that was that the family is trying to achieve in this situation? And I can only assume it's a safer environment for their family, for their child here. So it was logical that you'd say, okay, well, let's do a sign to try to achieve that. Some of the reports here specifically said there's no evidence that these special warning signs of this sort reduce driver speeds or crash rates. It's the unanimous conclusion of many credible sources we located on this topic. And by the way, this is a state report. This isn't Manager Bucas's report in regards to that. And it said they don't want to violate the principle that signage should be based on engineering, not political decision making. So in that light, I guess the question would be, what tools do we have that we can achieve that result that the family is looking for? You said that we've tried to use the speed wagon. Manager Bucas, would you recommend in these types of scenarios that obviously we'd probably start with the speed wagon in a scenario where we're having excess speed in an environment like this? But is this something where if the problem persists, we could have some additional patrols in regards to that, some targeted targeted enforcement in regards to speeding or other violations in that area, to try to bring some awareness, one, to the area and the issue, and all, two, get the desired result that the families was ultimately looking to achieve?
Yes, that would be the route to go. Is first we'd use the speed wagon, and so motorists are aware of what kind of speed they're going. Sometimes you go down the street, don't realize how fast you're going. And then after that, then we would step up code enforcement or police surveillance in that area. And one thing we'll find is that it's their neighbors that are doing all the speeding. It's not people from outside the area. That's been my experience is when we've done that.
Thank you, Alderman McClanathan, for that suggestion, really to best take into light the request. Alderman Ross?
Yes, I agree with you, Alderman McClanathan. We can get with the chief of police and plenty supply some radar patrol, some more radar over there just to slow them down and use whatever tools that we have and go from there.
So council, right now, before us, we have this, we have the two separate alternatives, and Manager Bucas has made a recommendation of alternative one, and I think we've had a good amount of discussion on that. What's your pleasure? Would you like to move forward to put alternative one onto a council meeting?
Chair.
Yes, Alderman Brescia.
Thank you. If it's something that should be done as far as making policy, I believe we should put forward option number one. At least I would like to, at this time, to the next council meeting, if we have time enough to rewrite that policy. Manager Bucas, I guess I'm asking you that question.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by rewrite the?
You said that we don't have this in writing in our ordinances, so would we have to make this into an ordinance?
I believe so. Ordinance or resolution? I think it has to be ordinance
Well, it needs to be an ordinance if we want to be able to
to put in
enforce it.
right.
So Counselor, you think you could help write this into an ordinance?
Sure.
That's my recommendation, that's my motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion made by Alderman Brescia, seconded by Alderman Parker, to draft an ordinance to be shared in our next council meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries.
No, voice vote is fine.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we're, any final words on this? Sounds like we're moving that ahead. So now we're on to item 15, public comments. Do we have any public comments tonight? Sure.
Just regarding the nuisance thing, because I knew someone that had a property next to them that they had nuisance. So who do they report that to? Who does the public report that to if they've got a nuisance next door? Who do they report that to?
Right behind.
That would be
Community
code
development.
enforcement.
What?
Kirsten, community development.
Houston Community Development? Okay, I just wondered. And then if they report it, are they given an update on if the city has dealt with that issue
Chair?
next door to them?
Chair?
Yes, Alderman Brescia.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Just as a
please.
point of, we do question and answer session with the public during the council meetings.
Okay.
But we can answer your questions after the meeting?
Oh,
Be
okay.
all right?
All right, thank you.
Thank you, just for policy.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alderman Brescia.
Sorry, Chair.
No, I appreciate it. Any further public comments tonight? Okay, do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Okay, I think I heard Alderman Busker, seconded by Alderman Berberet. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?